Hello and welcome back to Choices Chapter 22. This is Choices Chain, which might be my favorite chapter. I'll tell you why. But like many of the chapters in this book, when I'm reading them, I get a song stuck in my head. This chapter is no different, and it belongs to Chain of Fools, a hit in 1968 by Ms. Aretha Franklin, the Queen of Soul. The reason I think this song applies to the chapter is we all have, at times in our lives, played the fool, made mistakes, and sometimes made mistakes that have a lot of gravity. When you look at these mistakes a little closer, you'll find that it's often not a single mistake that happens, but rather a series of mistakes that get progressively worse. And these mistakes, like links on a chain, have the potential to be broken because, as Aretha says, every chain has got a weak link. And if you break a link in the chain, you will change the eventual outcome. So let's take a look at some decisions that have been made and how altering even one link in the chain can throw off the entire series of events. So for this, you'll want to go to full screen using the top right corners, and let's see some examples. First, starting with Tamara. Tamara is going to go to a barbecue with her wife. It's a barbecue at a coworker's house. Her wife doesn't want to go. She kind of feels uncomfortable around her coworkers, like she doesn't really fit in. Tamara's going to talk her into it. Both Tamara and her wife are going to drink quite a bit at this barbecue. Tamara's wife is going to be ready to leave, call an Uber, tell Tamara it's time to go. Tamara's going to refuse. Tamara's wife is going to try to pull her out by grabbing her arm. And when she does that, Tamara is going to pull her wife's arm behind her back, shove her against a wall, get in her face, and yell at her. So Tamara's take on the situation was that her wife was at fault because she's the one who initiated physical force, trying to pull her out of the house. But when you break down the decisions and look at them step by step, Tamara's able to see how each one of her choices led up to the eventual consequences. Starting at the top, Tamara makes a decision to talk her wife into going to a barbecue with her coworkers, people that her wife doesn't feel really comfortable around. Her wife does not want to go, but eventually is going to agree. Once they're at the barbecue, both are going to drink quite a bit, including Tamara. When Tamara's wife decides that she's ready to leave and is calling an Uber, she's going to tell her to leave her alone when it's time to go. And when her wife grabs her arm, Tamara's going to retaliate by grabbing her wife's arm, pulling it behind her back, shoving her against a wall, getting in her face, and yelling at her. Let's see how each of these steps could have been altered with some better choices. Starting at the top. So instead of trying to talk her wife into going to a barbecue with all her coworkers, people that she doesn't really know, feel comfortable with, Tamara says she could have taken her wife out on a date instead, spent some quality time together, just one-on-one. But let's say she didn't do that, and they do go to the barbecue. Instead of drinking quite a bit at the barbecue, Tamara could have recognized that in this setting, her getting drunk with her wife being uncomfortable was probably not the best setting. So she could have instead limited her drinking to 2 beers, made sure she ate because having food in your system affects how alcohol is metabolized and delays some of the effects of alcohol. and making a decision not to stay at the party for very long, because if she's not there for a long time, she's not likely to drink for a long time, and therefore be in a better mental capacity to deal with any conflict that might arise. But let's say she doesn't do that, she continues to drink, and now it's time for her wife to say, it's time to leave, the Uber's here, she wants to go. Instead of telling her wife to leave me alone because she wants to stay and hang out with her friends, she could have paid attention to how her wife was feeling. Was she uncomfortable? The reason why she wanted to leave, and left when she was ready. But let's say still that did not happen, and they're in the situation where her wife is pulling her arm to get out the door. Instead of Tamara responding by pulling her wife's arm behind her back, shoving her, getting in her face, and yelling at her, Tamara could have recognized I was drunk and is unable to effectively handle this problem in this moment. Instead, asked the friend if she could just stay at her house, allow her wife to get in the Uber and go home, get some distance, and address this issue when they're both sober. Very different outcome that could have been achieved by any one of these steps. Let's look at a second example. This is Malcolm. Malcolm is beginning to engage in a friendly relationship with a female coworker, just chatting by text. This conversation by text is getting friendlier and friendlier, kind of flirtatious, and all of a sudden, Malcolm's wife wants to see his phone. Malcolm's going to pull his phone away, tell his wife that she's a psycho, she's crazy for wanting to look through his phone. She's going to grab it, he's going to grab it back. In the process of grabbing it back, he's going to accidentally elbow his wife right in the mouth, resulting in a cut lip and a little bit of bleeding on her bottom lip. So at first, Malcolm looks at this like this was his wife's fault. It was his wife who was grabbing at his phone when he told her not to. All he was trying to do was get it back. It was accidental that his elbow hit her mouth, but it wasn't his fault. Let's take a look at some of his choices step by step. Malcolm decided to begin a talking relationship with a female coworker. In the back of his mind, he kind of knew that that wasn't the greatest idea, that he might be getting close to kind of stepping over the line. As they're texting back and forth, she starts getting kind of flirtatious with him. Instead of ending the conversation, what he's doing is responding back to her flirtatious texts with some flirtatious texts of his own. When his wife starts demanding to see his phone because she's getting the feeling that something isn't right, he responds by telling her no, it's his phone. It's ridiculous that she wants to go through his phone. She's psycho, she's crazy, she's making things up in her head. When his wife grabs the phone away from him, he responds by grabbing it back, engaging in this kind of tug of war with the phone. His elbow goes up, and that's where he accidentally hits her right in the mouth, bottom lip. Let's see how Malcolm could have changed the whole outcome by changing any one of these links in his choices chain. The first, when it comes to talking to this female coworker, he could have recognized that the relationship was not appropriate. He had that feeling in his gut. He knew he was getting close to the line. And instead, he could have kept the relationship to work only. Well, let's say he doesn't, and he proceeds with texting, and her texts start getting flirtatious. Malcolm, instead of responding back, could have laughed it off to kind of politely put an end to this, remind her that I'm married, and make a decision not to respond any further. Let's say he still proceeds and he's engaging in these texts, and now his wife wants to see his phone. Well, instead of saying that she's psycho and she's crazy, he could tell his wife that she has a right to look through his phone, especially if they've made an agreement to have transparency with his phone, knows that hiding things is only going to make it worse. But let's say he's still in the situation where he doesn't want his wife to see the phone. She grabs it away from him. Instead of grabbing it back from her, throwing the elbow, which accidentally hits her in the mouth, he could let her see his phone. He could let her know that it was wrong, the relationship was wrong, talking like that was wrong, and use this as an opportunity to address the real problem. There's the problem of the text and getting flirtatious in this relationship with this female coworker. But the way Malcolm sees it, there is also a bigger problem underneath this, which has been the distance in their relationship, the fact that they haven't been close in quite a while, that doesn't even seem like they're married anymore. They're just kind of going through the motions. So getting attention from another female for him felt really good. This real problem about their marriage is the thing that also needs to be addressed. And maybe this is an opportunity to talk about it and even to discuss the possibility of counseling to get the relationship back on track. You notice that at each step, even if he proceeds further down the chain, he has the opportunity to make a different choice. And in the end, any one of these decisions would have prevented his elbow from inadvertently hitting his wife in the mouth and cutting her bottom lip. Let's take another one. Let's look at Derek. Derek and his now ex-wife had a extremely high conflict relationship that resulted in a high conflict divorce and now a high conflict co-parenting relationship. There is a temporary restraining order. There is a military protective order, both of which says that the only communication they can have is on a court-ordered parent talking device that allows the courts to monitor their conversations. The only thing that they are allowed to talk about at this point is the kids and coordinating care. So this is Derek's weekend with the kids. He's got events planned. They're supposed to go to the zoo. And all of a sudden, his ex-wife is messaging him ongoing about the kids, making sure that he is checking her daughter's science experiment, making sure that his son is taking his cough medicine, asking to talk to the kids at various times, just message after message after message, interrupting their plans. Derek eventually is going to lose it and respond in a way that is very destructive for all of them. His first decision in this choices chain is that as his ex-wife is continuing to message him, he continues to respond back to his ex-wife's messages about the kids. And as he's responding, he notices some of his warning signs that tell him that he's getting pissed. He recognizes that his face is getting hot, his hands are shaky, so he knows that this emotional flooding process is taking place. But he continues to keep going, both reading her messages and firing back. And eventually, his response back to his ex-wife is to say, "Listen, you dumb bitch. I know how to take care of the kids. Go take care of your new boyfriend and have a great weekend." So Derek obviously is not a very good criminal, because the first rule of being a criminal is you don't write anything down. If you write things down, people will read them. And in this circumstance, I'll tell you some people who might be reading this text. The first is his ex-wife, who receives the message and is going to forward it over to her attorney. Her attorney is going to instruct her to call the police because there's a temporary restraining order. This is potentially a violation of the restraining order. So this message will be read by 2 police officers who will send it over to a domestic violence detective to determine whether a criminal case is going to be open. His ex-wife is also going to send this over to a FAP case manager who, along with the FAP case manager's supervisor, is going to evaluate whether this constitutes a new allegation of emotional abuse. If it is, 6 other people from the Incident Determination Committee will be reviewing this message, along with his commanding officer and a command JAG to determine if he violated a military protective order. All from one split-second decision to fire off an angry message. So let's help Derek out with some new choices. As his ex-wife, is continuing to send these messages about the kids, he could respond one time with, "Thanks, I got it," and leave it at that. But even if he didn't and continued responding, once he recognized these warning signs, he was getting emotionally flooded, his face was hot, his hands are shaky, he could make a decision to put the phone down and instead take the kids to dinner. Disengage with the situation. Know that whatever he does when he's emotionally flooded, he's likely to regret. But let's say he doesn't. Let's say he proceeds by typing out, "Listen, you dumb bitch, I know how to take care of the kids." His better choice would be to take a minute to think before sending. Take even a few seconds to think before sending. Consider how this message alone could impact the kids. Because the kids are his big picture. And once he draws that connection between his actions and potentially hurting his kids, he would delete the message immediately. At any step in this process, he could change the outcome entirely. That's the beauty of choices chains. These are fun. I could do this all day, but you probably have other things to do, so let's just talk about homework. And here it is, your opportunity to do your own choices chain. So I encourage you to think about this one for a minute before you start the homework and consider a time where you made a mistake that had some serious consequence for you. Something that if you could go back and repair, you would. And just like these previous examples, you're going to break it down just step by step by step, and then go through alternative choices for each step. So on the homework, it's formatted in these little boxes. If you have difficulty using that format, you can go ahead and write it out. Just write, "My first choice was," "My better choice would have been," "My second choice was," "The better choice would have been." But the boxes give you kind of a visual, though, of this concept of these chains and the steps that we go through when making decisions. It's not a singular action, but rather a series of choices that you have the power to change and alter the